carbon credits. Afterwards, we'll have Q&A and perhaps also a networking element to close it off. So let me introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Thijs Merton from Fair Climate Fund India. He works on building carbon projects with FCF India across Africa, finding high potential projects, restructuring partnerships, negotiating finances, and getting projects off the ground. FCF India works in nature-based solutions, afforestation, reforestation, and household products such as cook stoves and water filters, as well as community treatment facilities. For FCF India, considering the significant impact of the wash sector on mitigating and adapting to climate change, carbon credits play a significant role in bridging the wash financing gap. Thijs has worked for Aqua for All for nearly 3 years in Ethiopia before venturing into the carbon space. So Thijs, over to you.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Let me share my screen for the presentation. There we go. You can see my screen, huh? Perfect. So from what I understood, preparing for this session, some of you also wanted some basic introduction into the carbon markets. Of course, different people will have different levels, but I think it's good to start with the basics so we're all kind of on the same page regarding carbon credits. So what is a carbon credit? A carbon credit is a quantification of an amount of CO2 that is either taken out of the environment or that is being prevented from being emitted. One carbon credit being 1 ton of CO2 taken out of the environment or being prevented from being emitted, either through reforestation, afforestation, through clean cooking, through safe water supply, preventing boiling, biogas, briquettes for clean cooking, compost, etc. So how does that work in practice? You always have your baseline situation where X amount of CO2 is being emitted. Then when you implement the project, let's give the example of household water treatment to prevent boiling, emissions are being reduced. That difference between additional emission reductions between the baseline and your project is what is being quantified in tons of CO2, 1 ton being a carbon credit and sold on the market. I think it's very important to make this distinction as well, because in practice, we see that there's a bit of confusion here. There's a difference between the compliance market and the voluntary market. The compliance market, for example, the European trading scheme, is a market in which certain actors that emit large amounts of CO2 have to trade emissions. There's a maximum of emission set that's put at, for example, at 800 tons. An organization that would emit 900 tons has to purchase the right to emit that extra 100 tons and pay another organization that is, for example, 100 tons under that 800 tons. And thereby, by lowering that maximum over time, emissions across the EU are being lowered. Now, the pricing of these credits is much higher than on the voluntary market. The compliance market recently broke 100 euros per ton. On the voluntary market, pricings of 10, 15, 20 euros per ton are much more common. The voluntary market is the market that is applicable for the audience today. It is those carbon credits that are bought on the market on a voluntary basis by mostly corporates as well as individuals who want to offset their own CO2 footprint. Now, there's different standards and for certifying a project. The most common ones are Verra and Gold Standard. I'm sure you've heard of these names. And under these standards, you have different methodologies under which you can certify carbon projects. So what is the cycle of a carbon project? How does an organization like FCF or any carbon project developer actually work? First, you would go into looking, where's the potential? You would source deals. You would find organizations that have a potential for certification. You would go into a pre-feasibility assessment, find if there's sufficient scale, find if there's sufficient capacity for adequate data management and monitoring, and build a preliminary business model that makes sense for both parties involved. You would go into an MOU if that pre-feasibility assessment is found to be good, finalize a business case, agree on some terms, either in revenue sharing from the income of carbon credits or a consultancy, whatever works for both parties. Then you would design a PDD, hand in a project design document under VARA or under gold standard that describe the project in broad terms. Either you invest in the project yourself, or you mobilize investors that pre-purchase credits and thereby inject capital into the project. So either a carbon project developer themselves has capital, has working capital to invest into these projects, or you would find corporates to invest into these projects. Then you would go to the validation and verification stage of a project. An auditor comes in to audit the project. You monitor offsets, you generate and communicate all the necessary data on carbon sequestration or carbon offsets, as well as other SDG impacts. Then as soon as the project is validated by a third-party auditor, you go into that monitoring stage and into a verification stage under which your project is actually certified. After a certification stage, you would go into your MRV stage, monitoring, reporting, verification, where you continuously monitor the CO2 reduction that is taking place. Credits are being issued, revenues are being divided according to the agreements that are being made, and the project continues running and continues to generate credits. So what are the critical parameters behind carbon credits and behind carbon projects? First of all, it's your start date. The start date in which your project starts realizing emission reductions. The commissioning date of a project, for example, conceptualized by an agreement that is being put into place. Your baseline is important. Like I said in an earlier slide, what happens in the baseline situation and what is the carbon emissions that are taking place in a baseline scenario. Then your additionality. Carbon credits always have to be additional to what is happening on the ground already. Additionality can be conceptualized as regulatory additionality. Is it additional to what the government is already doing, to what policy is in place? And financial additionality. Is the income from the carbon credits necessary in order to actually create the project? And carbon credits have to be necessary in order to create the project, and they have to be additional for the carbon credits to actually realize the carbon offsets for the carbon sequestration. A methodology is very important, that you have the right methodology under VARA, under gold standard, that will help you to produce a good baseline, to do proper monitoring, and to have a methodology that is applicable to your project and to your situation. Stakeholder engagement is extremely important in carbon project development of local communities, private sector, government, etc. And all groups and communities that are affected by the project have to be engaged. And this is also done through a local stakeholder consultation meeting, a big meeting that has to be done for every carbon project, where all relevant stakeholders are invited and get an explanation about the project, about the carbon credits, how it works, and the way forward for the project. Then SDG impacts are also very important. For gold standard, you are actually obliged to also report on 3 additional SDG impacts, be it, for example, on gender equality, SDG 5, be it on safe water, SDG 6, be it on decent work, SDG 8, and you have to very clearly also communicate the impact on these additional SDGs. So I also heard timeline is a very important one for a lot of people involved here. How long does it take to certify a carbon project? It differs per project, of course. A reforestation project will take much longer than a clean cooking project, but generally, this is the kind of timeline you're looking at. Setting a project boundary, understanding the systems to be covered in the project, who are the stakeholders, opening an account for the project, selecting a proper methodology will set you back about 4 months. Doing a local stakeholder consultation meeting, generating all the data for the project listing, preparing the listing under a gold standard or Vera, getting that approved, an additional 3 months. Then you will do your baseline, you will make a database of all households who get, for example, a water filter, and produce all the data that is necessary for certification, and then validation will be done by an auditor. You finalize the project design if that audit is successful, and you submit all the documents and find closure of the project. Then you will go to registration for the project. You will get a review from, let's say, gold standard, get a response to all the findings, make sure that all the data that is being delivered is done accurately and scientifically correct, and you register the project, i.e. certify it. That process will last about 1.5 years. And then continuously, you of course monitor the usage of, let's say, your household water filter. And every year the project will be verified again in order to continue to generate credits. So what are the documents that you need to deliver if you want to properly certify for carbon credits? What are the things that as a project implementer or project proponent you need to have in place to successfully certify? You need to set a very accurate baseline in your delineated project geography where you will do the distribution. So let's take the example of household water filters again, or community water treatment systems. What is the kind of water source that people had access to before having access to your community system? What kind of boiling behavior do they have? What kind of cook stove do they cook on? What kind of fuel usage do they have? Do they cook on charcoal? Do they cook on wood? What is the time spent that they collect on that firewood, or what is the amount of money they pay to get access to that cooking fuel? You need to do water quality tests of your baseline water source, both bacteriological and chemical. And you need to do water quality tests of your project technology, so your community treatment system, of all community treatment systems. You need to make a database of all the households that get access to the water from your community treatment system. Carbon waiver agreements need to be put in place of all households who are engaged into the project. So they all need to be made aware of the carbon project and void their rights on the carbon credits. A monitoring report needs to be put in place of the water usage, data of the system's operational data, making sure that the systems continue to be functional and continue to be functional in a safe way, providing safe water continuously. Local stakeholder report needs to be put in place based on the local stakeholder meeting and the continuous stakeholder engagement that is relevant. And you need to report on additional SDG impacts, as I mentioned earlier. So what are some things to take into account then if you want to venture into carbon markets? Scale of the project is very important. A small scale carbon project of 60,000 credits, depending on a lot of different factors, on boiling behavior, on economic situation in the country, what kind of fuel do people cook on, et cetera, et cetera. If you want to fill a project of a small scale under gold standard, for example, 60,000 credits would amount to about 150,000 people continuously supplied with safe water. Local capacity of project proponent in delivering data is very important. So is the project proponent able to set a good baseline to provide very accurate data on carbon offsets, provide very accurate data on sales of systems, on usage of systems? Then the incentives for continued usage are, of course, extremely important. If you distribute household water treatment, you need to make sure that that treatment systems is being continuously used and that the incentives are correct for using it. And also that you supply replacement parts if they break down, or if you have a community treatment system, that you have that infrastructure in place to do proper operation and maintenance. And then, of course, awareness creation is very important on the importance of safe water, on the carbon project itself, and making sure that people continue to use a technology that is being certified. What are some eligible projects for certification? Community water treatment, household water treatment, briquettes for clean cooking. However, in terms of, from a sanitation perspective, from briquettes from human waste, it is always good to find, as we've seen in practice, to find that combination between then human waste and organic waste from other sources, and then to combine that with improved cook stoves, where you have a very strong case for circularity and for CO2 offsets by combining briquettes with clean cooking. And the briquettes can be from human waste, and it can also be from other organic waste. Compost production, same thing, preventing the emission of methane, which is 28 times stronger greenhouse gas than CO2. And then also making that combination of compost from other organic waste sources as well as human waste, and combining it, for example, with projects that focus on regenerative agriculture and using organic inputs instead of chemical inputs. And of course, biogas production, same thing, finding that combination with biogas from other organic waste and using it for clean cooking as well. Preventing the emissions from methane, also preventing the use of wood or charcoal, and preventing deforestation. So financials, I want to give the big asterisks that financials really depend on a lot of different factors. Sometimes Verra or Gold Standard will need additional reviewing. Verra would charge $50 an hour for this. Sometimes projects take a lot more time to set up. Monitoring can be more expensive, but I can give you a very preliminary overview of what would Verra charge for setting up a carbon project. Opening an account is a $500 fee. Registration fee for a carbon project is 10 cents, capped at $10,000. And then over $10,000, it's 14 cents. So if you have 50,000 credits, it's $6,100. Then your third-party audit, your validation fee, it depends on the project, it depends on the auditor, but $20,000 is a very often seen amount that you can assume for the validation stage of your project. Then your annual fee for verification is $5,000 for one program, 2 programs is $9,000. And then your annual issuance fee for 50,000 credits is $1,000, 2 cents per credit. But it's very important to take into account here the cost for setting up a baseline. You have to hire people. You have to make sure they have access to the right technology. You need to hire a car or a motorcycle to do the baseline. Setting up that local stakeholder meeting and inviting all those stakeholders who are relevant to the project. You need to do continuous water quality monitoring, measuring the uptime of the systems, the carbon waiver agreements, yearly monitoring surveys, etc. So it's always very important to make that budget before and have very clear what the costs are. And of course, this also excludes any cost that a carbon project certifier would take, either on a consultancy basis or a revenue sharing model or a hybrid model. So what would be my tips for the wash sector and for the audience in understanding this space and leveraging the voluntary carbon markets? Find project certifiers who are transparent and who are open about the certification process. Make sure that you express very clearly the mutual expectations and be very clear on your expectations, what you expect specifically in that certification process from a carbon project developer. It's always good to find financing for a feasibility assessment as well, so that a carbon project developer would find the feasibility of the project, both from a technical point of view on scale, as well as organizational capacity, and understanding all the data that you need to deliver, setting up very clearly the business case and all the financials, the cash flows that you can expect, and building that business case based on certification with you if the project is feasible. Make very, very clear agreements on roles and responsibilities. Who is responsible for setting a good baseline? Who is responsible for setting up the local stakeholder meeting and doing that proper stakeholder engagement? Make sure that all the responsibilities are clear from the get-go and agree on how to divide them. And then lastly, share risk and share returns fairly. So for any carbon project, it's important that everyone has skin in the game, that everyone is engaged into the project, and that everyone is motivated to make it into a success. And you need to find a business model that works for both you as an implementing organization, as well as a business model for a carbon project certifier that can be on a revenue sharing basis or a consultancy basis or a hybrid model. But agree on those financials and make sure you both have skin in the game to make it a success, and be transparent and be open about those expectations. So those are my tips. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thijs, for this really clear, very good, I think, very good overview